Hi, and welcome to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Today we are talking about what purpose does my Lambo have in my parking spot at work? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hey, I want to talk a little bit about appearances today. As by the title, what purpose does your Lamborghini have sitting out front of your office? All right. So, just ask yourself, what's your dream car? Maybe you're driving it right now. Maybe you're not. Maybe it's something that's on your wall. Maybe it's something in the back of your mind. Maybe it's something you don't even really kind of think about because you're not really into cars, right? Cars are just modes of transportation. But for a lot of people, cars are symbols of status. They are symbols of achievement. They are symbols of title and position, right? So I wanted to kind of bring this to your attention of, what is your dream car? And we'll talk about cars specifically, but this could be any number of things, watches, suits, jewelry, hairstyles, right? All those different types of things that, kind of present status and how you're perceived both internally in yourself and externally in how you're perceived in your workplace. But specifically, are you a Mercedes G-Wagon type of guy? Are you a Corvette person? That new Lamborghini, or maybe a Bentley, right? You're going a little bit more high society and class. Maybe you're the sky-high jacked-up dually that screams diesel and fuel efficiency. Maybe you're that Jeep rock crawler. You've invested multiple tens of thousands of dollars to make your Jeep able to crawl up the side of a mountain if you wanted it to. The point being is we kind of all have those things that we achieve and that are outward symbols of those various achievements and success, right? But the trick is, ask yourself, what kind of business are you in, right? Are you running a multi-million dollar, billion-dollar hedge fund where $100,000 cars are kind of commonplace because most everyone on your staff is at that level? Or are you running the local pizza shop where maybe to see a Lamborghini in your neighborhood is very unique and you just don't ever see one? I know for me, I didn't even see a Maserati until I traveled to Atlanta, and I was in my 30s, I think, at the time before I even saw one of those, right? And where I grew up wasn't very prevalent. You certainly saw BMWs and Mercedes and things like that, but nothing ever really exotic like that would indicate kind of a massive financial success of anybody. But the point being, right, there are certain things that are the norm in your culture. They're the norm in your workplace. And I want to highlight this because I was thinking actually about this last night of kind of an experience I had. So I had just joined the Air Force. This was, I was in my mid-20s. This was back in 2003. 2003, 2004 time, and I'd gotten to my first duty station at Eglin Air Force Base in the panhandle of Florida. And I was a young airman at the time, right? I'd come in, even though I'd had some college done, I'd come in, and I was older. I'd come in as a two-striper, right? An E3, airman first class. And I was a command post guy, which that's a whole nother story for another time of how I ended up in that. But I was a command post guy, and for those of you that don't know, command post guys they're 24-hour ops. We're essentially the liaison between the base commander and higher headquarters, higher Air Force headquarters, higher DoD headquarters, all those things, right? We're the people that answer the red phone when that rings. Okay, so for the most part, like a lot of the military, it's a lot of just kind of sitting around. You're there for an emergency response, right? If a plane crashes, you've got all kinds of stuff to do, and and you're there to make reports and handle that communication flow during emergencies. That's what a large part of what we are there for. But anyway, we report directly, the command post reports kind of directly to the wing commander, right? Because it's the wing commander where his voice to higher headquarters and that go-between. So we typically are located, or at least ours was at the time, and it has changed since because Eglin has gone through massive growth and changes and construction and all that. We were headquartered in the wing building, in the staff building. And so, which naturally the wing commander was. And I remember specifically walking into work one day. I think I was working day shift because, again, we were 24-hour ops. And I see this Ferrari parked in front of the building. I'm like, well, that's kind of odd. And lo and behold, it's the wing commander's spot, right? Because as the wing commander, they're the top dog on base as far as that goes. And certainly for that building, there were other generals on base, but for our building, he was the top dog. So he got the very front spot, right in front of the front entrance, a big sign, wing commander, and all this kind of stuff. And this, at that time, this particular wing commander was a former fighter pilot. Not a bad guy at all. I remember I had dealings with him on and off, especially as being an '06 colonel type and relating to a young E3 type. He was always very courteous and kind, and I never had any issue with him whatsoever. I always thought he was decent enough, but we certainly weren't friends by any stretch of the imagination, so I have no idea what he was like outside of work. But he would drive his Ferrari into work occasionally. And one hand, you could easily say, wow, what a jerk that he would kind of be flaunting this Ferrari around, because, most of the military is young. Most of the military are, fresh out of high school, guys and gals that, usually don't come from well-off families, right? It's very middle class America is typically who serves in the military. And so you don't get a lot of that previous experience or mentality of people driving Ferraris around. And certainly at that time, a Ferrari was a big deal, for me, and definitely financially. We were nowhere near that kind of level. But the point being, right, nobody really knew. Obviously, he was older, right? Colonel. He'd been in the Air Force probably at least 20 years at this point. And as a fighter pilot, he'd gotten his additional pay for being pilot pay and probably several deployments where you get tax benefits and deployment pay and all that kind of stuff. And who knows what else he had done or what his spouse had done to help them financially. But the point I'm trying to get across is, as you choose to, and I'm using the car as a status symbol because that's the example of what this is, as you choose to, and I don't want to say flaunt, but as you choose to display those things, you kind of need to really be aware of how it's being perceived, right? And and how that's going into the overall culture that you're trying to create in your organization. Now, certainly, right, there are uniquenesses about the military and, whatever. We had no play on it one way or another. He could have driven in a $500,000 Bentley. It wouldn't have mattered. I'd still have to follow orders. Although that would kind of undermine overall and probably arouse the suspicion of OSI and our investigating of why is a colonel driving a $500,000 vehicle. Anyway, but the point being, it was parked right in front of the building. So everyone, every visitor, from the youngest airmen to the generals that were coming in, saw this Ferrari sitting out there. And it kind of just got you thinking like, wow, that's interesting. Why is this colonel driving this Ferrari? Nobody else on this base is driving Ferraris, right? He's probably the only one on the entire base. Everyone else is kind of Honda Accord type people, Jeep Cherokee type of people, Toyota Tercel for the young airmen, or, little Kias at the time, just because they weren't in that realm of financial security, financial success. And you have to understand, most people, when you have success, especially financial success, and they're not immediately in that world of whatever that is that's causing that success, they do not recognize, let alone acknowledge, what you have done to get that level of success. And here I'm talking again about financial success and being able to purchase Ferraris and Lamborghinis and all those kind of things, right? Those outward displays. Most people outside of that immediate realm of whatever you're doing to earn that success, financial success, do not understand, acknowledge, or definitely don't recognize what it takes to get to that level. Especially, well, hopefully you're not hearing this. There's a fire truck going down the road. Hopefully the mic's not picking it up, but I am. So I'm trying not to get distracted. But anyway, you have to understand that. And especially when that audience that you're around, like for instance, this colonel's around primarily younger airmen that are not at his level, certainly. So especially when that audience of who you're around, of who you're leading, is not from that mindset, from that background to understand, one, that's possible, and two, to even believe that might be in their future, right? They just see that as a status symbol. They see that as you're flaunting these big old diamonds and necklaces, right? They don't understand that because they don't have necessarily the maturity level or the experience level or the confidence enough to kind of recognize and acknowledge, let alone praise, like, wow, congratulations, that's awesome that you were able to do XYZ to afford this Ferrari, to afford this Lamborghini. Okay, so you have to kind of be able to recognize this. And this all goes back, previous episodes, certainly about recognizing your audience, recognizing what you're doing and how you're being perceived in your marketplace, And certainly, if your marketplace is that, $1 billion hedge fund, and this is totally normal for your guys is to roll around in Ferraris, that is absolutely acceptable and probably the expectation. But I'm leaning more towards the opposite of that. Probably I don't imagine that I have any multi-millionaire, billionaire hedge fund managers listening to my podcast, but I would hope that I've got guys that are running, maybe $1 million businesses and they're turning a profit, and maybe they've had, a couple really great years and they're finally like, what, I'm going to buy this dream car I've always wanted to buy. And I'm not saying you shouldn't. Absolutely, you need to reward yourself. You need to, have those goals, whether they be financial or whatever, and be able to meet those milestones in order to do those things. But I am saying, if you own a chain of ma and pa pizza shops, rolling around in your $150,000 Mercedes G-Wagon might not be the best signal that you're sending to your people, especially if you're trying to build this culture of, hey, we are part of the community. We're in the, unless you're in the Hamptons or in downtown Beverly Hills, right, where that's the normal, then certainly, but most mom and pop pizza shops are not. So I hope you kind of understand the point I'm trying to get. I know it was very convoluted and my roundabout way of getting to it, but how you outwardly express your successes, financially or otherwise, in the form of vehicles, vacations, jewelry, watches, clothing, all those types of things have an impact on other people. And you need to recognize, just like my podcast the other day about recognizing when somebody is engaged with you versus when they disengage from you, you have to recognize, and now a train is going by too on my podcast. I love it. You have to be able to recognize that all has an impact of how you're perceived, okay? So how does that tie directly into what type of culture, what type of business are you trying to do? Is it a positive or a negative? Because you certainly can't go around, explaining yourself to everyone, and you certainly don't have to do that. But if you're building this culture, people have to understand, they have to be on board, they have to be a part of that identity that, maybe recognizes those types of financial successes. So I think I've kind of beat that into the ground. I hope that makes sense to you, and I hope my story kind of purveys that. For me, as an older airman, like I said, older, quote unquote older, I was in my mid-20s when I came into the Air Force, and a lot of my peers, similar rank, were all like 18, 19-year-olds, right? Much younger. I kind of understood and recognized, like, wow, that colonel, he's been around for a while. Maybe he made some really great investments over his 20-year career, right? He's probably deployed a whole bunch of times, blah, 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 whatever the case may be, that he could afford that and now has rewarded himself with that. Because I certainly knew guys that, bought Rolexes with their deployment money. I was deployed for a year and it saved me I think it was about $12,000 in taxes that I got, like, no kidding back, $12,000. Like, wow, that's amazing for me at that time. I could have easily gone out and said, you know what, this is kind of quote unquote disposable income and purchased a Rolex or something extravagant for my wife and I, right? And people, like I had mentioned, people rarely have the foresight and the thought to recognize that might be the case versus, oh, look at that guy's just flaunting his Rolex. Like, oh, he thinks he's so much better than me, right? And I know that a lot of people had that opinion of this wing commander at that time because he would drive his Ferrari up and park it in the front of the building so where everyone could see it, right? It just kind of makes you wonder a little bit. But that also kind of goes back to the Fighter Pilot Mentality podcast. If you haven't listened to that one, I highly recommend that you do. Nobody cares that you were a fighter pilot. It has some great information on it. All right, everybody. Kale at KaleHouserLeadership.com. If you're watching on YouTube, you kind of see we're setting up and changing our studio a little bit here, make it a little more interesting. If you have any comments, suggestions, or absolutely, critiques, please let me know at KaleHouserLeadership.com. Hey, have a fantastic afternoon, no matter where you're at in the world. Talk to you soon. Bye.